My stepdaughter looked me in the eye and told me the greatest gift I could give her wedding was not showing up. She said I wasn't her real dad. I was just Robert, the man who wrote the checks. My wife sat right beside her and said nothing, not one word in my defense. So I gave them exactly what they asked for. I disappeared, but before I left, I made sure I took everything that belonged to me. After selling the house out from under them and canceling every vendor for the wedding, the only thing I left in that empty kitchen was a folding chair and a receipt for $0. It was the shock of their lives. Before I tell you how I dismantled their world in 72 hours, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe loyalty is expensive and betrayal should never be free. My name is Robert Sullivan. I'm 68 years old, and for 15 years I was the silent engine funding a luxury life for people who secretly despised me. I spent my career as a CFO, reading spreadsheets, spotting bad investments before they cratered. I just never realized the worst investment of my life was sleeping in the master bedroom. It started on a Friday night at Le Bernardin, one of the most expensive restaurants in Manhattan. My wife Patricia sat across from me, her 26-year-old daughter Madison beside her, scrolling her phone between bites. The waiter set down a heavy leather bill folder. Without looking up, Madison slid a cream envelope across the table. The wedding invitation, printed on hand-pressed cotton I'd paid $5,000 for. I opened it, expecting to see my name as host. Instead I read, Mr. and Mrs. Gary Miller request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter, Madison. Gary, her biological father, a man who hadn't paid a dime of child support since 1998, who showed up once a year hungover with a cheap toy and vanished when the rent came due. My name wasn't anywhere on the page. Madison, I think there's a misprint, I said quietly. My name is missing. And she finally looked up. It's not a mistake, Robert. Gary's walking me down the aisle. He's my real dad. He has that rugged, artistic look. Fits the vineyard vibe. You're a little corporate. You look stiff in photos. I reminded her I'd already put down $80,000 in deposits, that Gary hadn't contributed a cent. She sighed like I'd handed her tap water instead of Perrier. Please don't make this about money. I looked at Patricia, my wife of 15 years, whose gambling debts I'd once quietly erased, whose lifestyle I funded down to the stitching on her dresses. Surely she'd speak up. Instead, she dabbed her lips with her napkin and told me, gently, not to make this hard on Madison. Gary was family. They didn't want him to feel excluded. Excluded. The man who abandoned them was family. The man who paid the mortgage was decor that didn't match the theme. I didn't yell. Years in boardrooms taught me that emotion is how you lose leverage. I paid the $800 bill and told Madison I understood. She lit up and immediately asked if we could upgrade the champagne to Dom Perignon, another $4,000. I looked at her smile, the braces I'd paid for, the dermatology bills I'd covered, all the entitlement I'd spent 15 years watering. Order whatever you want, I said. The ride home was silent until Patricia cleared her throat and asked, sweetly, if Gary could borrow my charcoal Armani for the wedding, since he and I were about the same size now. They didn't just want to replace me. They wanted to strip me for parts and dress the deadbeat in my own clothes to play the father. I said yes. My voice came out flat. I needed to be smarter than my anger. The wedding was in 3 weeks. Final vendor payments were due in 5 days. That was my window. 5 days to unwind 15 years of lies. That night in my study, I overheard Patricia on the phone with Gary, laughing. He actually said yes to the suit. He's so desperate to be liked. He just rolled over. We just need to keep him sweet until after the honeymoon. Once the wedding's over, we can talk about the house, convince him to downsize, cash out the equity. Then Gary's voice, tinny through the speaker. Does he suspect anything about the prenup? Patricia scoffed. He's soft when it comes to family. He's just an old ATM machine that needs a little oiling now and then. That sentence, ATM machine, was the one that finally killed whatever affection I had left. I opened my wall safe. Inside was a folder labeled Premarital Assets and Estate Planning. The house deed, sole owner Robert Sullivan, protected by a prenup because of Patricia's old credit issues, the trust controlling her spending accounts. Every wedding vendor contract, signed by me, not Madison, not Tyler. I wasn't just the ATM, I was the bank. And the bank was about to close. At 11:30 that night, I called my attorney, Arthur Blackwood, a man who never slept and never flinched. I told him I needed to sell the house, cash buyer, closed in 7 days, and cancel every check tied to that wedding. He didn't ask why twice. For the next several days, I played the fool they wanted. I doubled the flower budget, approved imported orchids, upgraded the menu to lobster and filet mignon, paid for a live jazz orchestra, a vintage Rolls-Royce, a fireworks display. Every deposit landed on Madison and Tyler's credit cards, not mine. I made sure of that, telling them I'd reimburse them Monday when the markets opened. By Sunday night, they'd racked up $65,000 in personal debt they didn't know was permanent. I toasted their happiness with a glass of water. They thought I was toasting a transfer of funds. I was toasting their execution. That weekend, Gary asked to borrow the suit one more time before the big day, gloating in my own study about how blood calls to blood, how I was just the resource. As he preened in front of my mirror, I slipped a small digital recorder into the breast pocket, disguised as a folded handkerchief. He wore it straight to the bar to meet Tyler for drinks. Arrogance loosens tongues faster than alcohol does. I sent Patricia and Madison to a luxury spa for 2 nights. My treat, I told them, so they'd glow for the photos. The moment their car pulled away, I called Titan Logistics. 2 moving trucks arrived within minutes. I had already sold the house, 20% under market, to a firm that specialized in fast, quiet closings, with one condition, a 7-day leaseback, so I could empty it before the new owners took possession. For the next several hours, my crew stripped the house to its bones. Everything I'd bought, the piano, the rugs, the art, the wine cellar, went into the trucks. Everything that was truly Patricia's or Madison's, I left untouched. I wanted the contrast to be unmistakable. In the empty kitchen, I placed one folding chair, facing a single envelope on the counter, the closing statement, the vendor cancellations, and a handwritten note explaining that since Gary was the real father, I had removed myself, and my bank account, from the equation. Then I locked the door, dropped the key in the lockbox, and drove to the airport. I boarded a flight to Rome, sipping whiskey in economy, while, 30,000 feet below, Patricia and Madison pulled into a driveway that echoed like a drum. I know exactly how it played out, because I'd studied these two for 15 years. The door codes wouldn't work. Madison peered through the bay window into an empty living room. They broke in through the back using the spare key I'd deliberately left in place. Inside, the folding chair, the envelope, the closing statement, the cancellation notices, my letter. Patricia read it aloud, her voice shaking apart on every line, ending with the truth neither of them wanted to hear. The house was sold, the wedding was canceled, and the money was gone. Then the notifications started. The caterer demanding $42,000 for lobster no one would eat. The florist charging $15,000 more to Tyler's card. His parents' emergency fund gutted in a single afternoon. Tyler arrived, saw the empty house, and calculated in real time what he'd actually signed up for. He turned on Madison in front of everyone. "I signed up to marry a Sullivan," he said. "Not the daughter of him," pointing at Gary, who had nothing. No money, no answer, nothing but a truck that needed a new transmission. Tyler walked out, got in his car, and never came back. That night, alone in a hotel suite in New York, I watched Madison go live on Instagram from the gutted kitchen, sobbing beautifully for 40,000 viewers, rewriting the entire story. I was jealous, controlling, cruel. I'd abandoned them with nothing. She never mentioned the suit, the debts, the word. DM. The internet, predictably, turned into a mob. A group of teenagers spotted my rental car at a red light and threw a drink at my windshield, filming it for views. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't give them their villain moment. I just turned on the wipers and drove on, because a public meltdown streamed to 40,000 strangers isn't gossip anymore, it's evidence. Arthur was already building the case, and Madison, in her desperation to hurt me, had just handed us a defamation claim with a built-in audience. That wasn't the end of it. Gary, fueled by whiskey and wounded pride, tracked down my rental address and broke into the small townhouse I was staying in before my flight, swinging a bat, screaming that I'd humiliated his daughter. I let him hit me. Every instinct from my years as a Marine told me to put him on the floor, but a fistfight is a mutual dispute. An old man beaten by a drunk trespasser in his own home is a felony. I stood there and absorbed it, silent alarm already tripped, security cameras already rolling. When the police arrived, they found broken glass, a bat on the floor, a bleeding 68-year-old, and a drunk man standing over him. Gary was arrested for breaking and entering and assault. I pressed charges. I had it all on video. 6 days later came the wedding. What was left of it? No venue, no vendors, no money. A backyard ceremony under a tarp strung between 2 trees. 12 guests instead of 200. Torrential rain turning the aisle to mud. Madison's $10,000 dress sank into the ground before the ceremony even started. Halfway through the vows, the tarp collapsed and dumped rainwater over Tyler's head, and something in him finally broke. He told her, in front of everyone, that he'd loved the trips and the trust fund, not her. That without my money, she wasn't the prize anymore. Then he walked back into the house and left her sobbing, face down in the mud, screaming that she was a Sullivan. She never was. I watched all of it from a cafe in Rome with an espresso in my hand. There was still the courtroom. Patricia's lawyer argued I'd abandoned her, drained joint assets, and coerced her into an unfair prenup. Arthur dismantled it in minutes. The postnuptial agreement had been signed years earlier, after Patricia racked up $150,000 in gambling debt that I quietly paid off in exchange for her waiving claims to my premarital assets. Then Arthur played the recording. Gary's voice filled the courtroom, gloating about their plan to bleed me for the house equity and divorce me once the cash was liquid. Patricia's own lawyer stopped arguing halfway through the recording and started packing his briefcase. The judge dismissed her claim with prejudice. She left the courthouse with nothing and nowhere to go. Outside, Madison caught up to me on the courthouse steps, begging, crying, telling me Gary and her mother had forced her into the video, that she'd broken up with Tyler, that she had nowhere to go and no money. I let her believe, for one moment, that I'd softened. I pulled out a binder, a trust I'd set up for her 10 years earlier, worth $500,000, meant to fund her education and reward basic decency at her wedding. Her eyes lit with hope right up until I read the conditions aloud. Proof of a real college degree, which she'd faked, having dropped out and forged the diploma, and respect for me as her father at the wedding. She'd violated both. I crossed her name off the beneficiary line in front of her and wrote in the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans instead. She collapsed on the pavement, and I got in a cab. 6 months later, I was living on a small vineyard in Tuscany. The money from that trust already doing more good in a single wire transfer than 15 years of enabling ever had. Gary was serving 3 years for assault and breaking and entering. Patricia was waiting tables at a diner in New Jersey, wiping down booths in sensible shoes. Madison had deleted every social account after becoming an internet punchline for entitlement. One evening, a text came through from an unknown number. Patricia, begging for $5,000, reminding me we'd been married 15 years, as if that number still meant something to me. I didn't answer. I didn't block it. I walked to the fireplace on my terrace and dropped the phone straight into the flames, watching the screen crack and go dark, along with the last thread connecting me to that life. I raised a glass of my own Sangiovese to the west, toward a prison cell where a man in an orange jumpsuit was sleeping off the consequences of thinking loyalty was something he could fake his way into. "Thank you, Gary," I said to no one. "You paid for my freedom instead of me." I lit a cigar and let the Tuscan night settle around me. For the first time in 15 years, being alone didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like winning. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, was I too harsh, or did they get exactly what they deserved? And tell me, what would you have done with that phone?